This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour. I'm Olgun, no Kane Pittman today. He is in Indiana for Media Day, seeing Johnny Furphy, some of the guys out there. So we, of course, have brought in my friend Pete Hooley. Pete, this has been a fun week of NBL action. We've learned a lot already. What's like your big takeaway so far?
It's interesting that it's only heading into round 3. We've got 2 rounds under the belt, and there's already some major concerns when you look at the small sample size of what the season could bring. And again, it's always the case that these first few games, they come back to bite teams in the end.
It's so interesting because you say major concerns, and I'm looking at the teams, I'm seeing like little indicators, and I'm trying not to make sweeping conclusions, right? I'm trying not to say, all right, this is your death knell, this is the thing that's going to end you. But like outcomes matter. Mm-hmm. It's going to get to a point where Sydney's win over Perth, for example, we're going to get to the midpoint of the season and it's going to be like, that was a really big win. Some of these losses, maybe by double digits, are going to hurt some teams. Brisbane not losing by double digits in all these games, that might save them. Like, it's a weird one. How are you like me, where you're trying to like decide or trying to find a balance of, all right, what's like a real indicator that's an issue that we've got to watch going forward, and what's like maybe just a little blip right now?
Yeah, I am, because I look at South East Melbourne, and what I see on the floor is what concerns me going forward for the season. Because if you actually look at it just from the small sample size, they've played 2 top 4 teams in Melbourne and Perth, and they've played New Zealand on the road, which is a tough road trip, and they're up and about at the first home opener. So who they've played is actually not that big of a worry, but it's what they're doing on the court which worries me going forward.
Yeah, you're a very negative person. We're not going to start with South East Melbourne. We're going to start with the Illawarra Hawks. They are 3-0. They're at the top of the ladder. They have a win in Sydney under their belt now, which is a huge win for them. And I didn't think that they would come out as strong as this.
Me either.
Because they were one of those teams that I thought, it's weird, them and New Zealand. I thought New Zealand was a little bit far behind in their preparation, and so was Illawarra. Justin Tatum came in late. They brought in a bunch of new pieces, including Darius Days, who was a very late addition. But all of a sudden, they look like the most high-powered offensive team. And we said it in the preseason, continuity matters. So continuity with Tyler Harvey and Sam Froling, Wani Swaka Uluc, Young Jung Lee, all these guys. But they're 3-0 right now. They're clicking. I don't know how long this lasts. It feels like they're in like a
honeymoon phase.
Well, it's like a 3-game extended flow state that it looks like they're in. How real are we? So we had, what do we have? Like Sydney, Melbourne, Perth was like a lot of people's top tier.
Yep.
Are you ready to Illawarra that?
I do have them in there, I think. And this goes back to, again, Media Day, when they were all on the same. We had all the hotel, everybody was up there. Just the vibe around this
Vibes
group.
are good.
It's so good, and clearly it is now. And again, and I was saying this the other day, being a small market team, like they're always around each other, but they all enjoy being around each other, and that is translating on the floor. The fact that they've already got this role clarity early in the season, when you bring in arguably maybe your number 1 option this late in Darius Days, and everybody's just like, that's fine with us. Yeah, he's our guy. We've seen him going out. And then Trey Kell has come in and just fits seamlessly into his role, and he is playing unbelievable right now. No one fought any roles. No one did anything. They're just like, we're winning games. We just want to win a championship. And again, it's so fun to watch. And I hope it doesn't end, but I do worry they proved kind of last year, right? Because they went through that patch of adversity where they lost. They lose 3 on the trot, I think, last year during Justin Tatum, and everyone was like, it's over. Yep. It was good while it lasted, and they just picked it up and nearly made a championship series.
So they're interesting. They've got 6 guys in double digits right now, averaging double digits, and that's not including Lockie Olbrich, who I think has been really, really good, averaging 7.7 points a game. But they just have a ton of weapons, and like you said, the role clarity. Because it looks like it's Trey Kell as sort of the head of the snake, at least early on. And then it's like, Darius Days is someone who looks like he knows where to pick his spots. He knows when he's got to be the guy, when he's just got to be that complimentary shooter who stands in a corner, or that guy who just like screens and pops. Tyler Harvey's the exact same. He sort of knows when to flick that switch a little bit. And it's like, all right, now I have to attack versus now I just have to be complimentary. Same with Froling. But the depth is something I think we knew about. Young Jung Lee coming in, Olbrich taking that leap. I feel like
Dave
O'Hickey coming in, getting his head on the rim. That opens up everything for their spacing. Now, the spacing is an interesting one because right now they're hovering around 39% from 3, which is probably just above the average of last season. That'll probably dip. And you look at Sydney's shooting just under 30% from three on a lot of attempts. You assume that'll go up. So a lot of things will even out here, but at least offensively, they're the best offensive team in the league right now. It looks like that's something that it's not really going to go anywhere because the talent is there, right?
It is, and again, I'm looking around the rest of the league. This is probably, because you say Trey Kell, the head of the snake, but this might be the one team where the head's going to change each game potentially. Yeah. And that's probably not the case all around, because Perth Wildcats, it's Bryce Conlon.
Yeah.
And Sydney now we've seen it's the way Gorgeous speaking, it's Jalen Adams, but it's Xavier Cooks as well. So those two are clearly defined. Melbourne United looks like Delhi, CG. Everyone else has that, whereas Illawarra's like one day if they've got a matchup, it's like, hey, they're probably having a pre-game meeting. We have a massive matchup here with Froling. Let's get him going early, often, as much as we can. Next one is Days. And then Trey Kell's like, okay, we don't really have one in this game. It is me. And everyone just accepts it and says, you know what, we're going to do it and we're going to have fun doing it.
Yeah.
And if they continue it, there's no reason why they can't go a very long way.
Yeah, the Froling one was interesting because they went at him early in that game against Sydney, because it's the one thing that everyone forecast about Sydney was there's a lack of size there. And as much as whatever Kelly Leopepe gives you in sort of girth, like the
he is girthy.
Very much so. The height is like it's a legitimate factor here. And that's really tough for this Sydney Kings team to defend. Tyler Harvey is one who we're going to get this promo out the way because I think we have to. This is PointsBet built different, and I think it's Tyler Harvey because the way this guy's been hitting clutch shots in the NBL over his, half decade in the league now is incredible. It was that one against New Zealand, I think, is the one everyone talks about. I love the one against Cairns last season, but this one against the Sydney Kings has Cam Oliver on an island, little step back, hits it. It's just he seems inevitable at this point when it comes to hitting shots when it really matters.
How many more of these does he have to knock down for you to, game on the line, give him the ball and not Bryce Cotton? It's getting closer.
It's absolutely getting closer. It's getting to a point where if you tell me it's neck and neck, I'm not going to argue with you.
Yeah.
I think all of the evidence points to Tyler Harvey having that sort of gene in him.
Has he missed one? I feel like he hasn't missed one, actually, when the game's on the line.
I mean, there was definitely a season where they went like 3-25, and so he probably...
They weren't that close games, though, to be fair. They were getting blown out a little bit more.
So he might have missed a couple there, but it seems like more often than not, Tyler Harvey, built different. He's doing it at a really impressive level.
You win some, you lose more. For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.
Illawarra Hawks are 3-0. The South East Melbourne Phoenix are 0-3. You mentioned them earlier. What is it? It's. Let me say this. I think a lot of us, especially after this last game against the Breakers, right? Ideally, Mike Kelly would have wanted to go at least 1-2 over these first three games.
They should not drop that game.
Totally, right? And we get it was Perth in Perth, Melbourne at home, but in Melbourne, right? The New Zealand one was not the gimme, but the one they were probably most favoured to win out of those three games. What is the issue here? It feels bad that a lot of us are pointing to Sobey, right?
It's very unfair.
But it feels. I don't want it to come across as like a media conspiracy that everyone's calling for Sobey to come off the bench. I just think a lot of people are seeing the same issue, which is these two ball carriers who look like they're just going your turn, my turn in a very non-cohesive way. And I think that takes away from both guys, but especially Derek Walton Jr., who I think a lot of us would agree is the best or one of the best initiators, creators, advantage creators in the league.
And I think that's probably the better way to look at it too. So we talk about changing the starting lineup, bringing Sobey off the bench. One is to free up Derek Walton Jr. and let him know. Well, Mike Kelly said he's the driver of the bus. So if he's the driver of the bus, how do you make him know he's the driver of the bus? It's what rotations he starts with, what combinations he starts with. And clearly, again, everybody's going to point the finger at Sobey when I don't think it's all his fault. I go back to the preseason. I keep talking about this, but all the preseason games they played, they really only cared about one of them, and that was against Sydney, and they played very well. And that probably also in the back of their minds, we've got things sorted. Where you have 9 new faces, 8 of them are in rotation, a whole new starting 5. It's going to take time. And clearly the growing pains are happening now, which people expect early on. They're only just losing these games to good teams, but it's more of what it could end up being. And I also think you need another non-ball dominant impact guy in the starting lineup, which means that someone has to sacrifice, right? So you bring in a Glover, someone, we spoke about this in the preseason, someone who can impact the game without needing the ball. Geordie Hunter's one, Glover would be another. And then when that second unit comes in, if it's Sobey, if it's Wieskamp, whoever, it's their time to shine. It's working for Cam Oliver in Sydney. It worked for Chris Golding for us in 2019. Those kind of things could help going forward. But clearly the growing pains are also inevitable with so many new faces.
But I guess the annoying thing about this is that I think it was forecast.
Correct.
We said all of these things going into it, right? And again, the schedule is the schedule. That matters. That is important to note. But we pointed to how do Sobey and Derek Walton Jr. coexist. We pointed to what are they defensively. I think when new imports come into the league, it's like, all right, Joe Wieskamp, for example. It's what a great shooter he is. Like, wowee, he was like so like on the fringe of the NBA. But it's like the real question is, why is he here? Like, what is the thing that's stopping him from being an NBA player? And it's probably on the defensive end. So if you already have what I think is a deficiency there, Matt Hurt isn't someone who's known as a high level defender. You don't want Derek Walton Jr. to be a primary point of attack guy when you assume you want him to do so much on the other end. You need someone out there who doing the dirty work sounds like just too basic, but it's whether it's a Glover or a Kenyon, just someone who's in there.
Would you start both and have Wieskamp and Sobey come off the bench?
I wouldn't do that. I think they should involve Wieskamp more offensively.
Yeah.
Use his gravity for the better, right? And obviously a Derek Walton Jr., Geordie Hunter pick and roll should be the sort of the nucleus of what that team is. I don't think benching Wieskamp is the answer, just because I think his skill set fits what I assume they want to achieve. But you have to understand like where the deficiencies are, and when you have Walton Jr., Sobey, and Wieskamp as your perimeter trio, I don't know which one of those guys is going to be guarding the primary offensive guy.
And you also don't want to change away what they do well individually too. So if you're like, no, we're rolling with our starting five, but hey, Sobes, Wieskamp, we need you guys to lock in defensively, and they lose what they do well on the other end. So that's why it can be as simple as, hey, we're just going to bring you off the bench in the first 4 minutes. We're going to put a point of attack defender in there, and then you can still play your role, and then we figure it out when it comes to the late game. My fear, as I said, my major concern, you can't look into history too much because history always changes, but no team that's began 0-4 in the 40-minute era has made finals. Mind you, there's no playing tournament then too, but these games, as you mentioned, like the Sydney-Perth game, they come back to hurt when you're chasing your tail late if it takes them a long time to figure out. Yeah,
two things. One, I'll hit the 0-4 thing in a little bit, but the idea of letting a guy rock, basically, and I look at the third quarter of that Phoenix game against the Breakers. I think the first 3 minutes, the only person who shot the basketball was Nathan Sobey. I want to say 3 or 4 of those times, it was a no-pass offense with Sobey just dribbling the ball down, getting a shot up. Now, I'm not saying, and look, he made some of those shots. He got an and one at the rim. He made it 3. I'm not saying that's all bad, but I don't want him doing that when Derek Walton Jr. is on the floor, because that's 3 minutes of what you... Sobey in a no-pass offense is never, in any world, the better option than the ball in Derek Walton Jr.'s hands, right? And so if you have the opportunity to put in Walton Jr.'s hands, I think you do that. And if that means Sobey comes off the bench or you stagger those minutes, like we saw with the Boomers, with Giddy and Paddy, right? If you stagger those minutes, maybe you're more effective like that. Being 0-4 is very scary. It's 36ers versus the Phoenix. So after that game, someone's remaining winless because either the Sixers are going 0-3 or the Phoenix are going 0-4. And then the Sixers, I believe...
They play Illawarra on Saturday night.
In Illawarra.
Yeah. And then if the Phoenix lose, they host Brisbane.
Yes.
Who could also be winless because they play Sydney on Saturday.
So Brisbane plays Sydney in Brisbane, their first game at the Entertainment Centre. I think most people would favour Sydney in that game. Let's say the Bullets are 0-3. We very well could be heading to a John Cain Arena next week with 2 winless teams, both extremely desperate.
Yep.
And both, I don't want to say seasons on the line, but basically like the soul of your season may be determined in that game.
Well, only because, and we say it, and it's so early to say like all of that, but only reason we're saying it now is because there will be another dip in form at some point where these teams hit a wall because it's so early in the season. It happens to every team midway through the year, maybe the back end of the year. If them already having one that's attributed to growing pains, trying to fix that and get through the other one as with minimal hurt as possible, it's hard to do. So then you're catching up your tail, and we know how close this league can get. So there is concerns, but again, I'm fascinated to see what happens tomorrow night.
Yeah, and look, I think back to last season, the Sydney Kings started off really, really well, ended up not making the playoffs. Illawarra Hawks started really, really poorly. They ended up making the playoffs. So things can shift. I think those two things are anomalies as opposed to the rule. But I think the other thing is when you start winless or you start 0-3, I think it does something to your psyche a little bit, and it puts more pressure on you. You get a little bit more desperate. I don't know if playing desperate is the way to win basketball games.
You don't forget it either. So like once, say you win 2-3 on the trot, and you're like, things are going well, but then you lose 2, you remember what happened at the start of the year, and that comes into play.
Yeah. Brisbane is very interesting to me because they have an important James Bateman who's underperforming. Keandre Cook has looked quite solid, I think. Casey Prather is what he is, but I think as a third import you could live with it. But if your first import isn't performing, then that puts a lot of pressure on Casey Prather, and I don't think his body is prepared for that sort of pressure. They are owing to 2 losses that, again, it's weird to think that if they were just switched on for a quarter in each of those 2 games, they might be 2-0. But that's the stuff that can kill you. I think a lot of the indicators are looking really shaky with that team right now. Is it just boiled down to Bateman needs to be better and that's sort of it?
Kind of, but also their use of the big men. So I forecast this early. I think everybody who knows basketball forecasted. You have an advantage on one end with the 2 tallest players in the comp.
Yeah.
But what that means on the other end can be a concern. And watching the film back, the amount of times everybody in the first game against New Zealand was, if you're off the ball, and I'm talking guys like Keandre Cook, Casey Prather, Dengadell, and you see Rocco and you see James Bateman and Mitch Norton, you're like, oh, they'll solve the problem. Rocco's 7'3", he'll solve the problem. And you're not helping each other, and then teams just picked it apart. New Zealand picked it apart, and Illawarra picked it apart. But again, what I saw in that first quarter of Illawarra, after you got labelled a pathetic performance, apparently had a very tough week practicing, which you'd expect, and then to come out the way they did in the first quarter, that's where I'm like, where's the head at? Where's everything going to go? Credit to them, the way they responded in the second quarter, but the damage was clearly done in that first one, how hard they had to get back into it. And James Bateman, it's a fascinating one for me because I think that I know he's a lot better than this. I think we all know he's a lot better than this.
He's clearly better than this. Whether he's an all-NBL level guy, we'll have to wait and see. He's clearly better than this.
And I think that a lot of it came from the preseason too, because they played very well on the blitz, and he played very well on the blitz, and you kind of get this false sense of, hey, like this is easy. Like, I can do this. This happened with Jordan Usher last year.
Yeah.
Jordan Usher in the first game of the year got hot, had 35, and then wanted to be a scorer for the rest of the year, when that's not his role. Because you get into that false sense of security. I think that happened with James Bateman, but also Dengadell was balling out where the Brisbane Bullets like, hey, maybe he's our guy in the starting unit, and then James Bateman tried to facilitate. I think they have to sit him down and say, look, we need you to just be our guy and try and lead us on the offensive end.
Yeah, that team defensively has looked, they're, again, very small sample size, everything that always has to be noted. They're bottom 3 defensive team right now. They haven't looked great. Them in their drops, again, they have to play these 2 bigs, right? And so they almost have no choice. They changed it up a bit in that game, in that second game, but them in that drops against 2 high level on-ball guys, like the space that Parker Jackson Cartwright had to operate was just immense, right? He sort of did what he wanted, like in that middle area. The same with Trey Kell. I think he just came off those. And again, I spoke with someone about this the other day. It's like, you're in a drops, and I think the Phoenix have this issue too. Like, what are you trying to achieve? Like, I don't know if these, like, what are you trying to achieve in a drops when you're guarding like that? You're trying to force, like, low-quality shots. And I feel like these teams are in these drops, but then they're also trying to take everything away, and that's not how this works.
My drops is very hard to get right.
Totally.
Now, the last time we probably saw it at an elite level in the NBL was when Bogut was doing it with Casper Ware as the point guard, because Casper refused to get screened, and he would just fight over, and everybody else would kind of help out. You need everybody to help.
Who else does it well? Melbourne United.
Correct, because
Shirley doesn't get screened.
Correct, and that you put a lot of onus on the point guard not to get screened. Now, the problem is we've got some very, very talented point guards who exploit that. PJC is probably one of the best at it. This week they played Jalen Adams, who's very, very good at exploiting that. But it does put a lot of onus on James Bateman initially, and Mitch Norton, who's very good at not getting screened as well, but he's coming off the bench. Hey, as soon as you get clipped, okay, we need Rocco Harrison to help out, but also then we need everyone to help Rocco out from behind. And I don't think they're on the same page with that. It's a very, very hard defense to nail.
Yeah. Again, and I think it's purely because these teams don't know. it seems like they don't know what they're trying to achieve with it, right? You're trying to force low-quality shots. You're not trying to just take everything away, be in a drops because you're a drops team and take everything away. I don't think that's how that works.
Weirdly enough, I think that could be a very good zone team if they did it all preseason.
Just because of how big and long they can
You got Dangadell, Keandre Cook, Casey Prather, you got Rocco and Harrison in the middle. But it's not something, they tried to do it in the Hawks game as well. They went to a 2-3 zone. I have a pet peeve with teams switching into a zone in the season, because it's not like when you practice it in the off season or you practice it during the week, you just practice against it. You don't actually practice it defensively. But they could actually, that probably would have been their better defense than what we've seen now with the length, and it's like that Syracuse style, really up high. Schuler's done it in the past with some teams, but it's also a bailout now
especially with no Sam McDaniel. Like I get what they want to do defensively, but no Sam McDaniel makes it really, really tough when you don't have your best and one of the best point of attack defenders in the league. That makes it very, very tough. The other team in Queensland, Cairns Taipans, I think they picked up a really healthy win against Adelaide. And I really like Rob Edwards, and I think from the first time we saw him, I think we knew it. It was like, you're...
Second bucket.
It was like, you're too comfortable here.
Yeah.
Like, you're way more comfortable than you should be at your age and your experience level in the NBL, right? Just his scoring off the dribble is incredible. All 6 of his three-point makes against Adelaide were off the dribble, whether they'll pump fakes, step backs, things like that. And that was without Taran Armstrong. Now, they look really cool with Kyle Adnam on the floor. I think that changed a lot. And I thought Pedro Bradshaw was really interesting when he wasn't trying to be the guy, which is something that we spoke about. When he was a connector on both ends, I thought they looked really good.
I feel like there was a conversation there with 40.
That would have to have been.
Because 40 knows what he's good at. He's brought in to be a 3-and-D guy. 40 said it. He might have thought it was going to be a little different coming into the NBL, but that's what you've made your success with your resume so far, with being that, and that's what Cairns need. They're always going to be tough to beat, especially in Cairns, but watching them play defensively as a team was unbelievable. The way they moved everybody. Credit to Tad Dufemire as well for stepping into not just an injury replacement, but a starting role and also major minutes, but what he did defensively to fit into that system. 40 always has the teams playing hard, and if you're asleep at the wheel, you're going to get beat.
And it's interesting that Rob Edwards had 31 points without Taran Armstrong. We almost forget, because every week in the NBL, it has its own news cycles. You really focus on that moment in time, right? But this team was built around Taran. There's an expectation that he's back this week, probably next week at the very latest. I have a story on ESPN.com.au, a feature on Taran, and speaking to some of the people around him and how he's grown and things like that. But once you add him to the mix, it seems like everyone, like Joan Antonio is playing really well on both ends, right? He nearly played 30 minutes in that game. I don't know if he's played that much in his career, but he's shooting the ball well. I think the shot selection is way better. That's something that's so important for this team. I think he's guarding way better as well. Tanner Groves played 7 minutes in that game. He still got to win. Sam Wardenberg had one of the best games I've ever seen from him. It seems like everything is in a place to click. Now, I don't know what the ceiling of this team is, right? I don't know if they're truly talented enough to get over the top consistently, but they look like a team that can be really well drilled, have enough talent to have a really solid floor. And again, it's almost a cop-out to always pick Cairns as like they'll be a bottom whatever team. This seems like a team that's well drilled enough and seems together enough that they're going to be reasonable.
The Taran Armstrong thing's interesting for me. I'm interested in your thoughts. So if he comes back this weekend, you'd expect him to be on some sort of restriction or just testing the waters. If that is the case,
because of the nature of the injury,
If that is the case, I'm holding him out because of what happened last year, where he came in after being injured and you try and find the role clarity. Throw him in there when he's going to be straight into the starting lineup and they can kind of figure it out. But just because if he comes in off the bench and things start to click, then you're enticed to think, oh, well, things are working. Do we go down that path? Are we switching it up? That's what worries me, because he's a 35-minute player for this team and a very important player. So if you just drip feed him in, what does that do for everybody else's role? We saw it last year where it kind of hurt his confidence. I don't want that to happen again. But the other side of it is you also want to get reps as many times as possible as well.
Well, reps is one thing, and neither of us are physios. You might know more about this than me, though, but it might be ideal to get some run into him as well, right? As in, is it probably good for the rehab process? Is this part of the return to play that he gets 15 minutes in his first game back and then 25 minutes, and then you can put like the entire minutes load on him. Is that how this works? Because if that's the case, then you sort of just have to eat that and accept that. The thing is,
Well, 40 wants him for Sunday because Melbourne United, you need as many point guards as possible.
that is true. And I'm about to get to a Melbourne United practice. I'm going to ask Dean Vickerman about it because Cairns is his bogey team.
Yep.
They played each other in the preseason, and I could tell Dean was stressed about it. Which
I found out before that game that they were taking that game as seriously as possible because of the bogey team.
Just to get it over their head, right?
And again, it's a meaningless game.
Yeah.
But it's the orange jersey in front of you.
It means, in the mind, it means a lot.
It is. The orange jersey means something.
Yeah. And so I don't think either Carl Adnam or Jackson McCoy are good enough at such a level that Taron Armstrong has a good game off the bench and Adam Ford thinks like maybe this is what we roll with.
I agree with you there, but I mean more so of how comfortable Rob Edwards then gets in his role and Pedro Bradshaw. So
I don't think either of those guys are ever going to be effective sustainably in the long term as ball carriers.
I'm also under the impression if he's just playing 20 minutes, they're started. Like you start him in the game and then he starts the third quarter. Maybe it's 5 minutes here, 7 minutes here. But it's not then, if you're going to play him, put him in his role to start with and then just taper off the minutes where you can at the end of the first half.
Yeah. Thing I want to end on, how much of Tacko Fall have you seen?
They're not bringing him back.
There's a chance.
They can't.
So
I don't. What does he do differently? I think for the Breakers and Freddie Gillespie, besides be a little taller.
I think Freddie Gillespie is like unbelievably way more proven in FIBA basketball. And
he's already shown that the one game defensively what his impact can be.
Right, and he's one of those classic bigs that we also knew that he was going to be impacted by fouls.
Yeah.
To start his time in the league, it was just obviously going to happen. But I think he's shown enough. I think there's like a mobility there that I think is obviously not there with Tacko. There is. I don't want to say it's serious consideration, but from what I was told initially when they sort of decided that they're bringing in Tacko Fall for these preseason games, it was basically an opportunity to get eyes on the game, right? It wasn't like a...
Normally it is.
Totally.
And sometimes it's a bit of help.
It's like a bit of help. Like they don't really need help at that position, I guess, but it's a bit of help. It's people are otherwise not going to watch this game outside of super fans of that NBA team and some NBL people.
Yeah.
People will watch Tacko Fall because famous man. They're going into it with an open mind, is basically what I've been told. That if he does perform in practices, in the games, then they'll put consideration into it. Freddie Gillespie is someone who, for a lot of the people who've been critical of him, there is some slim NBA interest that still exists in Freddie Gillespie, and he has NBA outs in his contract. So that's also something to keep an eye on. Like if there's an option for him to get on some sort of deal, then it's, I guess, an easy swap. But my bet is that Freddie Gillespie stays. I think he's good enough that he stays. And I don't know if Tacko Fall will be at the level. I don't think he will be.
I don't think it's not the greatest audition to go against Embiid in.
This is also very true. It's very true. But from what I understand, serious consideration is probably overdoing it, but an open mind is what they're going in with.
They've proven to do that every single time, though, right?
So they did with Anthony Lamb last year.
Lamb, it worked out well. We had Antonius Cleveland when we played OKC for Melbourne United, and then he ended up coming to the league and doing very well in the league. So it does normally translate somewhere down the track, depending how soon it is. But you'd be foolish to not have an open mind too, right? Because if he goes in there and has 15 and 15, and you're thinking, hang on, we could use this alongside PJC, and there's a way to do it, you'd always keep the door open.
Yeah. The other one on New Zealand is Matt Mooney had signed a contract that was partially guaranteed, not completely out of the ordinary for imports in the NBL. Basically, that guarantee date, from what I understand, is basically the end of those preseason games. The feel right now, things can change, but right now it seems like the Breakers are going to just let that pass and continue with him.
Which, from what I heard, and you would have heard the same a few weeks ago, wasn't the case. I was starting to hear things of like, we might have to have a look at things when we're over there. He has been very good since that, so credit to.
When they first signed him, it was, we're leaving the door open. I think the Freddie Gillespie headbutt changed a lot.
Yeah.
It made him not disposable, but more disposable than what Mooney was. But Mooney's been pretty good.
Yep.
I think him and Mitch McCarron are developing a really cool chemistry there. And I think it's become pretty clear that he's an effective guy in the league. So at least right now, and we'll see what happens in a week's time, but it seems like they're just going to basically do nothing as that deadline passes, and that means that they would keep him for the remainder of the season. Round What round are we up to?
3.
Round 3. Hoops Fest has tripped me up.
Everybody.
Round 3 of NBL 25 starts with, I think, the game of the week, because I think it's the one with so much stakes.
It's almost game of the season somehow.
Right. It's not like the two top teams playing each other. It's Adelaide South East in Adelaide. So Adelaide's home opener. Both teams winless. One team's going to be in a whole lot of trouble after that one, and one team's going to have a whole lot of relief after that one.
I got to ask you then before we wrap: will we see a starting lineup change from no teams, one team, both teams?
I think we see it from one team, and I won't tell you which.
Okay, I like it.
I think one team it's more obvious, and the other one maybe wants to give it one more game.
You just gave me the answer.
What do you think?
Well, that's Adelaide Adelaide's going to change. It's an obvious one.
It sounds like Adelaide. Not sounds like it. It feels like Adelaide will probably. It's easier change to make.
Yeah, and then I think the Phoenix will give it one more game too.
I think one more game, and we'll see what they look like against Brisbane next week. But thank you for coming in.
Anytime.
Kane, you've got to join us next week. He was in Indiana. He had terrible Wi-Fi in his weird Indianapolis hotel room.
That's what happens when you get the first class flight and you spend it all on the flight and you can't get the nice hotel room.
This has been the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour. Thank you for joining us. We'll catch you next week.